Morning, guys. Sorry about the delay. I was just waiting for something to load. How's everybody after the weekend? So we are now down to our last 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. Of classes anyway. Yep. Last 2 weeks of class. So, yeah, I know, sure. On one hand, it seems to have taken forever. And on the other hand, it seems to have gone so quickly. Like just the other day, we came home and carried on a semester 2 from home, and now suddenly the year's finished. But on another hand, it seems like we've been living like this forever. So, guys, because we have finished our financial management, should I say, curriculum syllabus, I thought that what we could do today is just have a look at a paper. I'm just having a look. Where's my list here? What's today's 19th? So we've still got the 19th and we've got the 21st, which is that also this week? Yeah, and that's on Wednesday. The day timetable, I saw the 27th. Yeah, that the 27th, there's only one. So what I think we'll do is on the 19th today and the 21st, we'll have a look at the past exam paper in today and Wednesday's class, and then that's it. Then we'll be done. The 27th we can leave unless there's something that somebody wants to do, unless you guys want to look at another paper, and we can do that on the 27th. Otherwise, I think that will be kind of like enough prep. Okay. And then obviously with our tax we'll continue because there is still quite a lot of actual content that we have to finish there. So this is just to, I mean, I know that you guys that are diligent will have downloaded past papers and go and have a look through it, but sometimes it's nice just to have a look through it for the lecturer, so that from a point of view of what to watch out for, etc., you can get an idea of what's going to be, or not what's going to be in the paper, but you know, like what could possibly be in the paper, the length of the paper, the type of questions, etc. So this one that I've got here is a 2015 paper. So yeah, it's quite an old one by now, but the textbook curriculum hasn't changed. 2015, we're still seeing the same content, and because it's the same content with the same textbook, you quite often find that similar questions do still come up. The only thing that's changed from back in 2015 to now is that the assessments now have a larger emphasis on using your financial calculators, which I don't see on my desk at the moment. I don't know what I've done with it. I think it's in my briefcase somewhere, but that's all right. I'm not going to worry about calculators today. It's just looking at the actual questions and what they've asked. Okay. So remember, your exam is, why did I put that in my textbook? Is going to concentrate on those last couple of learning units. Which is really 6 and 7. But you will obviously, because there's 180 mark we have to test you on, there will be questions on every single learning unit. When we set exams, we don't leave any learning units out. It's just that the longer questions will come from that section that you haven't been tested on yet. Okay. So your leases, hybrid and derivative financial instruments, and mergers and takeovers. Those are technically your exam questions, exam chapters, but mergers and takeovers is quite a short chapter. It's very heavily theory related. And there's only those couple of calculations in that learning unit regarding valuation of the assets or valuation of the business and your exchange ratio, etc. So there's not much in there. So the majority of your so just have a look at this one. What they asked us here, the financial manager, excuse me, determine whether to implement the cash discount. And this is a 35-mark question. So in these nice big chapters, which are 4 and 5, working capital, current assets and current liabilities, because you were only tested on that, and there's only 60 marks to test. There's a lot in those two learning units. You can't test in those 60 marks. So that's why you will get questions out of 4 and 5. And if you recall from those two learning units, there are long questions in there. Those are the ones where you've got to do a very serious series of calculations and then come to a conclusion. So I would definitely make sure that you learn 4 and 5 together and that you can do those super long, call them calculations, but long, what are they? They're financial models so that you can make a decision at the end. I would say that without a doubt you will get a long question from one of those. So, and remember, there's all sorts of different ones. This particular one is early. Should they implement the early settlement cash discount? They could ask you, should they extend the debtors' collection terms from 30 days to 60 days? Or it could be on liabilities. Should you, sorry, and the other one is on the debtors, should you factor, not factor? And the liabilities, you've got all those, you've got all the other ones related to the liability side that you could have as well. Both of those learning units, make sure that you're prepared for whichever one they're going to ask. I'm not going to go through all the detail in the question because you guys hope, you know these by now. All of this particular one might not be on IE for you to download, but there will be, going right back to, I guess, around about 2014, I think they've got papers. I don't know if they take any of the very old ones down, but you will have these papers available on the IE past papers thing. Okay. So it's a simple question. It's just one very short little sentence, and it's for 35 marks. So they're not giving you any help or assistance or hints or anything in this required. They assume that you will know exactly how to go about laying out your solution in order to be able to come to the conclusion that you could then answer the question. Okay. So you guys think you'll be all right? Well, I know you'll have to still do your revision, but you're okay with what you've got to prepare for those. I would definitely make sure you're prepared for those. And if you know your layout and you know the routine for these questions, that 35 marks is a very nice lot of marks that you can put in the bank if you know how to do these questions correctly. And remember also with these questions, it's the way that you lay the solution out, the very clearly marking each calculation with that section's result. Please leave spaces. I'm so tired of marking papers. I had to do, what was it, finance exams from semester 1, the last ones for the second years this weekend, and the students just squash one question and one section of the question right underneath each other with not a single line between it. And just from a visual point of view, my eyes trying to follow that and trying to mark and separate the workings, it's really horrible to mark. And I'm sure I miss marks. So it just becomes physically impossible to do it properly. So I don't have the time to sit there, and it's on screen, so I can't sit with a ruler and separate it and use a pen and it and draw. Usually I draw my own lines if I'm marking physically so that I can separate visually for myself, and I can't do that on screen. So let's just go and have what the layout of this question would look like. Let's see if I can get there quickly. Oh, this is so tiny on the side here that I can't really see what's going on. Random. Okay, so here's an example of how you must lay it out. And when you're practicing these questions, the way that you lay your answer out and separate it, the one section, so you've got a total here, separated, you've headed each working so that when you're looking at your workings as well, you can clearly see, have I covered the bad debts? Did I cover the discount part? Have I covered the increase or decrease in contribution section? That you don't leave anything out. And also when you are coming to do your summary at the end, remember, don't forget at the end is your conclusion, the result, where you then, this is your summary of each of those sections, giving you the net increase or decrease, and then please don't forget your conclusion. Students are still continuing to lose huge amounts of marks because they don't go back to the required and see that the required said discuss whether or advise whatever, and that they do the calculations and then they forget to go back and answer the actual question. So there's a mark for saying that they should or shouldn't offer the cash discount. Okay, so you can see, and this, you got examples exactly like this in the textbook as well. If you use the textbook and the examples and the solutions that you've got, you'll be able to exactly study and memorize this layout. So your headings for each section will be different depending on what they've asked you, which particular scenario they've given you. And please also, the one place that students do lose marks on this question, and I have had students that have lost the entire 35 marks where they've done a beautiful calculation, but they have done it from the wrong point of view. In other words, if it's the debtors and then they've taken it to be creditors. So everything that's an increase they've said is a decrease, and they've swapped everything around. I hate it when students do that because I can see they know their work and they know it, and they try to quickly rush and get what they know down on the paper. But they didn't stop to check the difference between the debtors and the creditors. Really, honestly, take highlighters and rulers and red pens and whatever, these Coke pens, whatever you've got in different colors, so that you can really make sure you highlight debtors or creditors. Every single year, second, third year, first year in accounting as well, students lose marks because they get the wrong one. Okay, so you always know that just about your first one you're going to do, you have to always look at the impact on contribution of whatever the scenario is. Is there going to be a net increase or a net decrease in contribution from implementing whatever the action is that we're measuring? In this case, there was a bad debts expense that was going to increase or decrease. There was going to be the cash discount that we were going to have to give. So again, we were going to lose some money because of giving the cash discount that we didn't give before. And then don't forget also the impact of the cost of capital, change in cost of capital, depending on the amount of working capital invested in your, in this case, accounts receivable. And that this section over here is, it's an interest cost, or an interest cost, basically. So in this particular one, there was an increase in the average investment in accounts receivable. So that meant increased interest, which was a net outflow. And there's the summary with the net total from all your workings, and then the conclusion. Okay, so then we've got question 2, and this is for 20 marks, and it's got several smaller sections, and what the required is here, calculate the earnings per share and the PE ratio of each company before the merger. So again, you've got to use your highlighter, and again here, and I know when I see a question like this, I know that there's going to be half the students that have only calculated the earnings per share for both, or they've done the earnings per share and the PE ratio, but only for one company. So make sure you know what the instructions are and then follow the instructions exactly. I want the EPS and the PE ratio for both companies. Calculate the additional shares that they would need to issue to shareholders to complete the acquisition, and the total number of shares in issue post-merger. So this is your Learning Unit 7 question. Calculate the market price exchange ratio, calculate the post-merger EPS of both companies, and then, excuse me, calculate the expected market price post-merger. And then for 2 marks, discuss why the expected market share price is higher or lower than the current pre-merger share price. So in your textbooks, you've got, there is a full example in the textbook. You know those sections where your textbook based with example 7.1, and they'll do PE rate, and they'll do exchange ratio, and then they'll do example 7.2, and it will be the next section. So if you follow in your textbook, you'll see each of these sections is covered in an example in your textbook. So you do have that, and then also take note of the information. Sometimes, again, because you're third years, they're not going to give you the straightforward information. They might give you some information, and then you have to calculate, for instance, the number of, they won't give you the number of shares, and you have to calculate the number of share information that they've given you. So make sure that you know where to look for the bits of information that you need in order to calculate a certain the values. Okay, so if you've gone through Learning Unit 7, if you went through it when we did it online, you'll recognize this layout. And this is also a very typical exam question. Pretty much, as I said, there's much that can come out of Learning Unit 7. So this question is very typical of what you'll get for Learning Unit 7. So in this, they've covered all of it. PE ratio, EPS. This one, you need to know where to go to look for the information. And also that you must know the difference between the market price exchange ratio, the expected market price, etc. So you know the difference between the different ratios and the different things that you've got to calculate. So here's the solution to that. And again, take note of how the memorandum has been laid out. Obviously, you don't have to draw lines, guys, but label everything properly with the different section numbers and leave proper space between them, so I can clearly identify which workings belong to which section of the question, and that there's a space, and then you've got the next section with the answer and the workings for that. And also remember that whatever workings you've got, number the workings and cross-reference the answer to those workings in your layout of your main answer. And obviously you can write it down higher. I mean, you don't have to do it in 2 columns like this. You can do it however you want to, but the benefit of doing it like this in 2 columns is that all these line descriptions, you only have to write them out once. If you do NASCAR first and fast wheels underneath, then you've got to write this all out and that's going to take some of your time. So that's why it's beneficial to lay your answer out like this. And also I've noticed, and it's, I just can't remember, it's not so much for the third years or not for many of the third years, but when you are writing down your answer as well, this, these descriptions, line descriptions, they must be there. Those are part of your answer. If you just write down these two columns with just these numbers, there's nothing to tell me what each of these numbers is. And technically then I shouldn't mark it because the question has asked you for whatever pre-merger PE ratio. So you need to say that this is the earnings, this is the shares, this is the share price, etc. If there's, especially if the student has got the answer incorrect, because then you've got this jumble of just numbers on the paper. They don't tie back to the memo because the numbers are not the same because they're incorrect. And then I just have to pass that question by and not mark it at all and give it a 0 because it hasn't been laid out and labeled correctly. If some of you have looked at the papers that I've done, you'll see that quite a lot of them I have said, please label your work, label the numbers, put descriptions in. That's also a very common error that the students make. So here is the pre-merger PE ratio. Then the number of additional shares to be issued. The market price exchange ratio. And then what was this one? You had to calculate the EPS after the merger for both of them. And then what's the expected market price per share post-merger? And also just take that they sometimes only ask when you've got a question where there's two companies. Some of the questions they'll say, work this out for NASCAR, work this out for Fast Wheels. So be careful of that because students have also lost marks where they haven't done the calculation for the correct company that was requested. Okay. And then we've got question 3 for 15 marks. And this also comes from our learning unit 7. This is 15 marks theory. And here they are talking about the spinoffs and divestitures. So that was that one section at the end of the chapter. I know that it's quite a, it's a paragraph right near the end of one of the sections. Divestitures, there it is there. It's 7.3, 7.3.2 in the textbook, page 204 or thereabouts. Where's the spin-off section? Oh, there we go. Methods of divesting. And that methods of divesting is one of the learning objectives. So it's a very small section of theory in your textbooks, but that's 15 marks of the paper. So don't leave that out. I'm just looking here, I've got in my textbook an old exam question as well from this section. No, that is this one, 3.4. Oh, sorry, I need to go to the bottom of the paper. Okay, so that's question 3. You know where that comes from. And as I say, that's also a popular question. And then question 4 for 35 marks is a buy or lease question. So this is our Learning Unit 6. Also an exam chapter, and it's another nice big 35 mark question. So we've got information from a company manufacturing cement considering acquiring a generator. So as soon as you see that word acquiring, you know they want to buy an asset in order to prevent any disruptions as a result of expected power outages. Option to either lease or buy the new generator, and the details of the 2 options are provided below. And then they'll give you all the information that you need, the costs and the benefits, etc., and expenses related to the company leasing the machine, and everything related to the company purchasing the machine. We've got the tax rate, and remember where the tax is concerned in these questions, you must read in the question, when does cash flow related to the tax expense happen? Okay, so assume a tax rate of 28% applies. Deductible tax cash flow relating to the lease or buy decision arises in the year that it accrues. Sometimes they say arises in arrears, and then take all of the tax and move it over 1 year, because we don't pay the tax in the year that it accrues, but in the year after that it accrues. Students lose 3/4 of the class, always lose those marks. And that the company does have sufficient taxable income against which to apply any tax deduction. So that just means that can deduct that tax expense. All calculations to 2 decimal places. Watch out for those instructions so that you are getting your decimals correct. And then in this one, luckily for you, they broke that lease or buy down into the different sections, because you know in the textbook, again, the answer to this question has got from example 6.1, relevant cash flows pertaining to the lease alternative are calculated as follows, and then you've got 1 table for that, and then you've got the after-tax cash flows of the purchase alternative, and you've got 3 different tables for that, and then you've got your conclusion. So here they have broken it down into the different sections. After-tax cash flows of the lease, the interest cost of the buy alternative, which you know for 8 marks, that's your amortization table that you have to draw up so that you can get the interest cost in order to then use in the next part, which is calculating the tax shield if the buy alternative is chosen. And then the tax shield just means the amount of expenses that you are allowed to use in order to do your tax calculation. So this is where you then calculate the amount of tax you're going to save. And then here is the actual cash flows of the buy alternative. So the difference, remember, that is in the tax shield section. You are going to include the depreciation or the amortization expense of the machine that you've bought, because that is a part of a tax shield, but that is not a cash flow. So that then in order to get the cash flow, you have to add the you have to add back the depreciation expense. And then for 7 marks, calculate the present value using a 10% discount rate. So remember, you can use your calculator to calculate the present value factors, or you can use the tables. But please don't, remember our tables have got, oh, they're not in 3B, they're in 3A. The tables, I think, have got 4 decimals to them. I don't have an old paper here. It's got the tables, and you must use all of the decimals so that your answer is most accurate. I won't mark you wrong if you've only used 3 decimals for the present value factor, but it's just that you will be more accurate. Okay, so make sure you know how to, and you have practiced getting the present value factor. whether you're using your calculator or the tables or whatever. And then lastly, for 1 mark, you must then give them the conclusion. Should they buy or should they lease? Also an extremely popular question, this one, the buy or lease alternative. And again, it's the exam chapter. That's the longest question out of the exam chapter, so it's very likely to come up. I think this is the right one. Yeah. So here you can see again how to lay it for. And I would also head each of these. So I would put a heading that says lease cash flows, and then so that again, even for yourself. And I know this from sitting and writing exams myself when I'm doing complicated calculations and I've done workings, and then I need a figure from something that I've already done to carry down in a later calculation, and I look back and there's just these tables and numbers, and then I have to carefully work through from the beginning again, what was this one again, what was that one again, to make sure that I'm taking the right amount, and that just wastes time. So although it seems to take a lot of time to label everything when you write it down, it's going to prevent you from making mistakes when you need to carry figures down from your workings in other parts of the question later, and when you've got to write a conclusion. And it is part of writing a good paper, is to clearly lay it out with everything detailed of what you're doing. Okay, so the cash flows is fairly easy. It's just that all you've got is the lease payment minus the tax, and just put the tax in the correct year. Obviously, for the lease payment, it will be in the current year, but just in case, and that at the end of year 4, in this case, they then have an additional cash outflow to purchase the generator. And then we've got our simple after-tax cash flows. And then for the buy alternative, you have to do your amortization schedule first, which is, if you know how to do it, that's an easy 8 marks, and then you're going to use this interest expense. Your next part of your question, so again, head your columns properly so that you know you don't go and take the wrong amount. And remember, in that question, they said 2 decimals. They wanted 2 decimals. And then they wanted the tax shield. So in this section, you list every single allowable deduction that the company will have when they are calculating their tax for the year related to the fact that they're buying the machine. So they're allowed to deduct interest. The maintenance, insurance are now expenses that they've got for the buy alternative that they didn't have for the lease alternative. And they are deductible expenses. And then your capital allowance, your Section 12C capital allowance, is also an allowable deduction for tax purposes. So then you calculate the total of all of the deductible expenses, and then you take 28% of the expenses. And then that is then your tax shield, which means the amount of tax that you will be saving from a cash flow point of view if you purchase the machine, you don't lease it. And then the after-tax cash flow. So again, remember the difference between your tax shield and the cash flow is that for the tax shield, only the interest is an excess separately from the capital allowance. You've got the interest and the capital allowance as 2 separate expenses, whereas for the cash flow, what's going out of your bank account is the rand value that you are paying to the finance house for the installment. Your maintenance and insurance will be exactly the same amount, and then you take your answer here, the amount of tax you saved is then a cash flow in. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Remember to get your cash flows in and out the correct way round, and you must indicate out with brackets and in with no brackets. Or otherwise, here in the details, you must say less the installment, less maintenance, less insurance, plus the tax shield. If you don't calculate, indicate whether it's going out or going in, then you can also lose marks like that. And it's going to make it difficult for yourself when you are calculating your total. So that's important, all of these here as well, that your cash shield, these all cash outflows result in a cash inflow, the tax savings. And then they ask for the present value of the lease alternative and the buy alternative. So then you take your answers from the lease alternative table, cash flow, and you take the answers from the buy alternative cash flow table, and you then apply a present value factor here, which will be the same for both, and then multiply the cash flow by the present value factor to get the present value, and also make sure whether it's a cash outflow or a cash flow, and then you get the two answers, and then say they should lease the generator because it is the least cost alternative, because these are cash flows out, both of them. This is the lowest cash flow out, so therefore I'm going to choose this amount. Okay. So remember, they didn't give you your present value. To these here, you had to calculate. So practice making sure that you can get the correct present value factor for a question. Question 5 is for 25 marks. And this is your students' favorite question, Learn Unit 1, Cost of Capital. And have a look again. We've compiled the following financial data. We've got 3 different sources of capital. They've given you their book value and the market value and the cost. In this case, you've been given the cost of each type of capital. So you could be asked to calculate the cost of each type of capital, or you could get a question like this. So remember, always look back to see what did they ask me in test 1. They won't ask you the same question in the exam for that learning unit. They asked you in test 1. So in test 1 this year, you had to calculate the cost of capital for 3 or 4 different types of sources of capital, and then you had to draw up the weighted average cost of capital table. So you won't be asked that same question again. So you'll likely get something similar to this. So given that information, they've then said, explain what is meant by the weighted average cost of capital. And when you ask for explanations or definitions or discussions, your indication is the number of marks. That's going to tell you how many facts you must write down. And notice that I've said how many facts you must write down and not how long your paragraph must be, because some students are very skilled at taking one fact that they know and then embellishing it and writing it down in 3 different ways. So the length of the paragraph isn't going to give you the marks. It's the number of facts. And I quite often find that I'll give a student, I know, you must be in my position marking. And I can see, and they get so eloquent in their sentence, really trying to milk that one fact that they know. The student that knows their facts, that have memorized them and they know them, usually write a short little paragraph, and I can go tick, 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 and they've got all 3 marks. And the student doesn't know their work. You've got this long paragraph, and there's either no marks or 1 mark. And then for 8 marks, calculate weighted average cost of capital, and take note using the book value weight. So remember, in that section, they tell you that there's 2 different methods that you can use to calculate WACC, we can either use the book value or the market value. Round all answers to 2 decimals, and assume that any relevant tax effects have not been included in the cost above. In other words, remember when we're calculating WACC, we want the after cost. So you must go and make sure that whichever one is applicable, that you convert it to after tax cost. So revise that section in cost of capital, which ones do have a tax effect and which ones there's no tax effect in. So remember, just from your little income statement, if the cost of that capital is paid by the company before we get to that net profit section of our income statement, net profit before tax, then there is a tax effect. And if the cost of that capital is paid after net tax before profit, tax after profit after tax, and then below that we pay preferred dividends and ordinary dividends. Those do not. Make sure you understand that completely. So then you know it's only the long-term net that there is a tax on, not on your preference dividends and not on your ordinary dividends. And then for 7 marks, calculate the weighted average cost of capital using the market value weight. So you had to do both of those. So you had to use a book value one and a market value one. And again, assuming that we haven't taken tax effects into account. And name any 3 effects of issuing shares at a discount. So what they mean, effects in the marketplace, effects on the market price of that share, perceptions of the investors, etc. And it's 3 marks, so you need 3 facts, and then discuss the difference between cumulative and non-cumulative preference shares. So where you see that it's for 4 marks, you know that you have to give at least 2 differences, and you'll get 1 tick for this is how cumulative shares work versus this is how non-cumulative preference shares work. And different, this is how it applies to cumulative and this is how it applies to non-cumulative. That's the way to lay out your answer. So always use these number of marks as your indication of what facts we're looking for. Back one. So your question, I can't remember what they asked here. Oh yeah, they wanted to know what the WACC is. Explain what that is. So have a look at how they've allocated the marks. That's what I want to show you. See, for 3 marks, it's 1 short sentence. But what they were looking for is for you to state that the WACC is an average or a weighted average of only the long-term or permanent sources of capital, and then it's the cost of the future funding for a business. Okay, so WACC represents the expected average. That's the mark, the word you get in the mark for. Average long-term or permanent. That's a mark. Cost of future funding for a business. Okay. So you can see you don't need to take a lot of time and write a whole bunch. You need to know the essence of the definition of WACC, what it is. And then book value weights. Here's our book value weights. And you've got to remember this, knowing this little layout, the format of this little table is how you calculate WACC and no other way. In these columns, so you list the first column is the different sources. Then in the next column, you've got the value of each of those sources so that you can get the total of the value, so that you can then calculate the weighting of each of the sources of the total. And then once you've got that, your next column, you need to write down the after-tax cost of each source. And your final WACC column is the weight multiplied by the after-tax weighted average cost of capital each of the sources, and then you add those up, and the total is the weighted average cost of capital. So your weighted average, because added these, we've weighted them and then added the weighted amounts together. So that's the average cost of capital. And capital being only long-term sources of funding. And here, debt of the tax cost. So we do save 20% of the cost of the interest in tax. So only 2% of the full cost is our actual net cost. And then using market value weights, we now just put the market values in the first column, and then we same exercise. It's now each market value as a weighted total. Your costs will be the same and multiplying it. So your WACC using book value weights is 14.17, and using market. And then what did will ask us? Oh, the effects of something. So the company should be able to sell more shares, creating greater liquidity. Percentage shareholding of existing shares is diluted by the issue of new shares. And existing shareholders and investors may interpret the new share issue as an indicator that the company is being overvalued by the market. Because obviously, when the share price is high in the market, that's a good time for a company to issue new shares, because they are going to raise the maximum amount of new capital when the share price in the market is high. So that's why investors watch, and if a company issues new shares, then okay, so the share price must be at a premium right now, because and the company is taking advantage. That was question 5 that we just looked at, huh? Yeah. So then question 6 is for 25 marks. This is, what are we doing here? Buyback category, share buyback scheme. This is the dividend policy one. If you own the required, if you own 15,000 shares and you are not participating in share buyback, what is the effect of either decision on the value of your shareholding by referring to the following question below? So the company is expected to trade at a price earnings ratio of 10 PE, so your PE ratio is 10. Remember, your PE ratio is calculated by, so it's 10 equals market price divided by total earnings divided by the market price. The market price per share is expected to be 35 Rand before the dividend payment, and the price earnings ratio is based on this price. So that ratio of 10 is based on a market price of 35 Rand. So in other words, 35 divided by EPS is how we calculated 10, but we don't know what EPS is. The company has got 1.5 million shares in issue, and Lupa Limited's earnings are expected to remain constant for the foreseeable future. So they've got the option to either distribute all of its net income for the year as a dividend, or it could use that same cash that they would distribute as dividends. They could use that same amount of cash and buy back shares at the current share price of 35 Rand, inclusive of the expected dividend. So neither decision is expected to have any impact on the PE ratio, so we can assume that whatever happens, our PE ratio is going to remain 10. So this is a question that has also come up often in exams, because again, it gives the examiner an opportunity for you to calculate several different things. And take note where the most of these marks are coming from. It's 12 marks right at the end where you've got to discuss 4 disadvantages of a share buyback scheme. So they are bringing the theory questions in here. And all of these are calculations of amounts that you've got to calculate. And there is, if I'm not mistaken, a question or example exactly like this in the textbook, and they have used it often in test papers in the past. Where are we? Here we go. So because you were given the PE ratio and the market price, you had to calculate the EPS, R3.50. Then net income after tax is, again, they didn't tell you what the annual income of the company was, but you again had to know that. If I know what my EPS is, and I know how many shares are issued, if I multiply those two together, I can work backwards to calculate the earnings for the year. And then expected share price is the 35 plus the R3.50. Remember, the R3.50 is my EPS, my earnings per share. So current market price plus this year's earnings per share equals R38.50. The share price prior to the dividend being paid. The company is paying, and that is if the company is paying all of the net income as a dividend. Okay? In other words, the full earnings per share, 100% of the EPS, is going to be paid to the shareholder. And then if we take the net income and divide it by 38.50, that, what was that, the share buyback? Yeah, what price do they have to pay for the share buyback? I think that was the question. So if we then take the full annual earnings and divide it by the R38.50, which is the price we would have to pay for a share buyback, we would then be able to buy back 136,364 shares, which would then reduce the shares in issue from the 1.5 million to 1,363,636 shares. So what's the expected share price after the share buyback? Then take, what is this here, the earnings, the earnings divided by the diminished number of shares equals R3.85. So after the buyback, the expected price would be R3.85. What was the times the PE ratio is then R38.50. This is, sorry, the R3.85 is your earnings per share. It's earnings divided by the number of shares in issue would give you R3.85 EPS, and EPS times PE ratio gives you price of the share. So what they want to illustrate there is that whether they paid all of the earnings out as a dividend, that would increase the share price to R38.50. And if they took those earnings and they used them to buy back a certain number of shares, retired those shares, you then had fewer shares in issue. And if you then took the earnings and divided it by the lower number of shares, you actually end up at the same share price post. In both cases, your share price after doing the dividend or the buyback is the same. This is a very popular question. I've seen this come up year after year as well. Guys, when you are doing your revision, I'm just trying to think, Oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. If there is any question that you are revising from past papers and you are genuinely stuck with them, then just give me a shout and I will try and assist you. Whoopsie, I'll try and assist you with a solution. Because we've got so many papers, there are so many past papers, I can give you a practice paper with solutions, but I don't think that's really helpful because all of the solutions to all of the past exam questions are in textbook, either in an example or in a question. So you can find them there. Your only problem, you don't need me to bring to you. On the odd occasion, there have been questions that aren't in the textbook, and maybe they look a little bit tricky. In that case, let me know, and I can help you. Or if there's a question that you understand and you can find the solution, but you're not sure how they got a certain amount. What were the workings? How do you go about that, or what's the thinking behind it? You can also ask me that, and I'll be able to help you. But it's silly for me just to go and, publish like a million. And we're not supposed to give solutions to past exam papers anyway, because and the reason for that is that very often they've got errors in them, which when we do in our marking, we query and iron out with head office. So that's why we've been told we can't give memorandums to students, because students use the memorandum to study, and quite often the printed memorandum is not the final answer to the question that we use for marking. Because when they correct memorandums, when we're doing the marking, they don't republish the memorandums. So that printed memorandum that we've got is the only version that ever exists, and it does quite often contain errors. But I'm very happy to help you guys with solutions if you do need them for any question. But I'm not going to give you solutions if you're just going to be lazy, and instead of looking in the textbook for the solution, you just say, I'll just send Heather an email or WhatsApp and ask her for the solution, because I know what's in the textbook and what's not. So don't do that. So your question 7 for 25 marks is a cash conversion cycle question. 18 marks, calculate the length of the cash conversion cycle for 2 years, for the years ending February 2014 and February 2015, assuming 365 days in a year. And please, guys, if they say 360 or they say 350, you must use the number of days that they say they are in a year. Don't just assume anything and use whatever you practiced with. They have also asked you to state what formula you have used, as marks will be allocated for these. So you must write the formula down, then the workings, and then your answer, because there's marks allocated for all that. So your cash conversion cycle is out of your working, is it Learning Unit 4? We did cash conversion cycle, working capital and current assets management. Okay. And then 7.2. Calculate the increase or the decrease in the RAND investment required to support the cash conversion cycle. So remember, in your textbook, that one example and question. Let's see if I can find it quickly. 87, where we have to do exactly that. Example 4.1. The total average investment in the operating cycle. So for this question and this learning unit, these 25 marks, you must know off by heart your formulas for calculating number of debtors days, number of creditors days, number of cash, number of inventory turnovers per year, number of inventory days. You have to memorize those, because you have to do those. That's why they're asking here for formula. You have to do those 3 calculations to calculate what my debtors and my inventory and my creditors days are, because you need those number of days in order to then calculate what your cash conversion cycle is. So you would, if you can't do those, was it the same? I can't remember. I think you're right. I seem to remember the forms. You will lose, if you can't do those 3 calculations, you'll lose those full 18 marks, because you can't do that question if you don't know those 3 formulas. Okay. And then if you can't calculate the length of the cash conversion cycle for 2 years, you won't be able to do this question either. Increase or decrease in the rand investment, because you need to know how many days your cash conversion cycle has increased or decreased to, so that you can calculate the rand value of that difference. So those 25 marks, it's essential that you know your formulas. Yeah, so just remember, it's also not cast in stone, because I saw in first semester there were questions in the same semester 2 that were almost identical from the test to the exam that the student wrote. But generally speaking, if it's been done properly, because usually it's the same examiner that writes the test 1, test exams, and when we write exams, we were told, you know, questions, they can't be similar. And if you've already tested one aspect in the test, in the exam. So that's an idea. This is a very good idea of what a paper will consist of. So we've got finance on Wednesday again, so I will upload, we're now 2020, I'll use a 2019 or 2018 paper on Wednesday, and you'll just see the only difference in the solutions is that there's more financial calculator stuff. I actually, to be honest, I prefer the way the students had to do it in these papers, because they had to know their formulas, they had to do all the formulas and the calculations themselves, and you know, I think it dumbs it down a little bit to use financial calculator. Anyway, I'll do a 2018 or 2019 paper on Wednesday, and then you can see the difference. So if you do have any preferences of what you want me to cover, then let me know. So I can just make sure I've got access to that particular year's paper, and that I've got a scanned copy, and I can go through it with you. Okay. Does it help to go over these exams together like this? And guys, I know we're quite talking about watch out for your decimals, read the question carefully, but honestly, that's where the students lose their marks. They don't lose marks. If you know your work, the place you're going to lose your marks are those exact, traps, student traps. They're not traps, because again, when we write tests and exams, we are instructed not to use any trick questions. So that's another thing. There are no trick questions in the paper. So if it looks like a trick question to you, then you're just misinterpreting something. The students put themselves up with those same mistakes every time. Okay. So yeah, and it's funny. I mean, I noticed when you guys uploaded your tax assignment, I haven't marked them, by the way. They're still coming. There were 5, 6, 7 students that uploaded the assignment to test 2 and not to the assignment link. So that's just for me an example of paying attention to detail and being careful and reading the thing correctly. And you know, so if it says an assignment, load it to the assignment link. It's not a test 2. So you just have to have your mind wide open, looking for things like that. Okay. Anybody got any other questions or any special requests for Wednesday finance? got time to think about it and then let me know. Okay. All right, guys. So we have got tax just now. Stephen Duncan. Yeah, so we've got tax just now, so we'll carry on with our where we left off. So I hope you guys did do that last chapter. What was it? Turnover tax, and then we'll continue from there. Okay, so I'll see you in a minute. Okay, bye.